All right, looks like most people have logged in. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kenny Voss, and I will be your moderator today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on right-of-way and project development. This is the second webinar in our design webinar training series. We plan on hosting monthly webinars related to program delivery. Our goal with these webinars is to ensure employees receive the technical training necessary to successfully deliver projects into the future. I have a few housekeeping items to go over before we get started. First, we are scheduled for 2 hours today. This includes time for the presentation and time for questions and answers. We are recording today's webinar, as Jessica said, and we'll place the recording in Mo.U for future reference. This webinar will also be added to the course catalog for the Program Delivery Training Program. All lines are muted during the presentation. The question and answer function will be open, so I encourage you to send questions to all panelists. So you'll have the option of sending to an individual, but please send all the questions to all panelists so we can review the chat pod. We will be monitoring these questions during the presentation to determine if we should break into the presentation for clarification. We will break after the presentation and address questions from the Q&A pod. The presenters will also take additional verbal questions at that time. This presentation will have some interactive opportunities using Webex annotation tools on the left side of your screen. The presenter will ask for your participation to indicate when you can use these tools. As a friendly reminder, when you use the arrow pointer tool, your name will be shown on the screen, so please use other annotation tools if you don't want to be identified during this interactive part. For today's webinar, we will have several presenters. I am pleased to introduce our opening speaker, Brenda Harris. Brenda Harris oversees MoDOT's right-of-way program. In addition to the right-of-way program, Brenda is also responsible for MoDOT's outdoor advertising program and design division's administrative staff. All of today's presenters work together to ensure we have a successful right-of-way program at MoDOT. At this time, I will hand it over to Brenda to start the presentation. Brenda.
Thank you, Kenny, and welcome to the training. This training includes key focus areas for project managers and defines their roles when right-of-way is involved on a project. Several of the areas we will be discussing today happen concurrently in the process of program delivery, but we will define that during the discussion. We will begin with why scoping is essential to not only determine the project budget, but it also helps identify early on the potential impacts and roadblocks that need to be removed, and if a right-of-way consultant can be utilized to balance workloads, define a better schedule, and allow enough time for development of accurate right-of-way plans. Project manager also has a role during negotiation, condemnation, and up until the project is cleared for letting. The rights of the citizens, we the people. Federal and state laws require specific procedures and processes to be strictly adhered to when purchasing property for public purposes. This goes as far back as the U.S. Constitution, which established America's national government and fundamental laws guaranteeing certain basic rights for its citizens through the 5th and the 14th Amendments, the due process clauses, but more directly through the 5th Amendment's taking clause. The taking clause states one of the fundamental rules when acquiring property for public purposes is that the owner be paid just compensation. The Constitution went into effect in 1787, so acquiring right-of-way is not a new concept. In fact, it could be property could be condemned for public use even in the late 1700s. The federal and state laws have been updated numerous times since that point, but the basics were around even when MoDOT was not a governmental entity, which also brought about the Uniform Act. The Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Act of 1970 was passed by the U.S. federal government in 1970. The intent was to extend the constitutional rights of the people and further define how agencies must determine just compensation. This ensures property owners are protected and treated fairly as long as agencies follow the guidance that defines benefits and payment guidelines. When a project displaces an individual, family, business, farm, or any type of improved property, additional tasks and payments are required under the Relocation Act. The Missouri law mirrors the federal law with one caveat. Missouri has House Bill 1944, which provides even more procedures involving heritage and homestead payments on top of the just compensation. Homestead payments, it doesn't matter if state funds or federal funds are used in any portion of a project, the Uniform Act applies. The Uniform Act contains 3 parts. Title I is the general provisions which defines specific terminology. Title II is the relocation assistance, which defines moving payments, reestablishment of payments. And Title III are the policy and requirements that each governmental agency is required to follow. It includes the appraisal standards and specific sections for right-of-way. Details are described throughout this section, which establishes the rules for acquiring property. I would like to introduce Mindy Sundermeyer for the next slide.
Hello, yes, I'm Mindy Sundermeyer, and I'm a right-of-way liaison. I work in the St. Louis district, but I'm a central office employee. This slide, we are going to get kind of the pulse of the audience to see how long you've been in your current role. So like Kenny had stated, you should be able to use the annotation tools on the left side of your screen. There's a little bar there. And I see some of you have found it. And you can use the square box if you click out to use, you can use the X, anything like that, to kind of mark your years of how long you've been in your current role. Looks like we have a diverse group out there. All right. Looks like we have a very diverse group. Our 6 to 7 year area is a little less populated than the others. So that gives us kind of a good idea from a presentation standpoint, what kind of experience we're speaking to today. So thank you for that input. Next, we're going to move on to the right-of-way terminology, and I'm going to turn this over to Megan Atha.
Thanks, Mindy. I'm the Northwest District's right-of-way manager, and I want to just go over some terms that you commonly will hear in the right-of-way world. We have several types of property rights that we usually acquire: right-of-way, permanent easements, temporary easements, and a right of entry, and access rights. For the right-of-way that we acquire all property rights of that area, and in turn, we control the area. With the permanent easement, we acquire an area to use for a specific purpose and is intended to be reused in the future, but can only be used for this specific purpose. The ownership of this property remains with the property owner, but the easement gives us the right to use it. And because of the defined use, this easement might not be able to be used for a new project. For example, a channel change easement cannot be used to construct a new bridge or add a new drainage system. And common types of permanent easements are drainage, utility, ingress, egress, channel change, and site distance easements. For a temporary easement, an area is acquired for a specific time frame which usually is the duration of the project. And MoDOT's rights cease at the end of this project. And common temporary easements are for borrow sites and construction. A right of entry is the permission to enter on the property, and this can be for a specific period of time and for specific use. However, this can only be used to access another area. So if any work or dirt movement is to take place, we really need to get a temporary easement. To convey property, there are different types of deeds that we use. The first one is a quitclaim deed, and it's used when we cannot guarantee title. When we use this, we usually use it to convey excess parcels. General warranty deed is guaranteeing title. This is how we usually acquire our properties when we for projects. Other deeds include, but are not limited to, special warranty deeds, deed of trust, and a beneficiary deed. Within the deed is a legal description, and this is used to legally define the area in the conveyance. And this is done by a professional land surveyor and will be recorded as part of the deed at the recorder's office. The legal description includes meets and bounds, as well as stations and offsets, and centerline description of the route. Most of you are probably familiar with the different classifications of access control. However, what's important for you to know from a right-of-way standpoint is that access is a property right, and to limit or control this access to a property, we must purchase this. For areas with controlled access, an entrance granted must have an access break. This break is defined with, it's located at a specific station point, and it's recorded in the recorder's office. Entrances can be added, removed, and moved, but there's a process for each of these, and is generally a joint effort between traffic and right-of-way. Because access breaks are so limited in some areas, these breaks can become very valuable, and they can be purchased from one property owner and moved to another property. The break must remain on the same route and in the same county, and traffic would still need to approve the new location. I wanted to touch base on the difference between ownership and responsibility. Ownership means that the MHTC, the commission, purchased the property rights for a route, and we have a deed for that. Responsibility refers to who is responsible for maintenance, and this is usually determined by the maintenance agreement. It's important to note that TMS does not distinguish between these. It only accounts for responsibility. So if you're out there looking at TMS, just keep that in mind. There are three common types of ownership interests. Fee simple ownership, which means that one owns the entire property. There's a leased fee interest, where you're usually the tenant, and there's a leasehold interest, which is the landlord. Many times you'll hear of us refer to the underlying fee or question who the underlying fee holder is. And what this means is in older deeds where the commission purchased right-of-way, the deed is written in such a way that infers that we only purchased an easement, not the entire fee simple interest. So years later, when we try to sell an excess parcel, we can only sell what interest we purchased. Because we only purchased the easement or the surface layer, that means that someone else still has ownership interest in the remaining property under the surface, and they are called the underlying fee holder. Because we don't own everything, this is why we use the quitclaim deed. And basically, we're not guaranteeing title. We are only conveying what we own. Mindy, you're up next.
Thanks, Megan. Yes, this topic is the design public meetings process and requirements. And we just wanted to bring this to the PM's attention of, making sure that they have this on their radar. From a right-of-way perspective, if it falls within these requirements, if there's 5 or more permanent acquisition, land or permanent easements, or 200,000 square feet in urban area, or 20 acres in rural area. I want to keep in mind, you've probably seen some communication that the section 129 of the EPG of the public involvement section is in process of being approved with several updates to it at the January EPG ballot approval process. And if that is approved, this recommendation is going to be changing this amount of requirements to 100,000 square feet in the urban area or 20 acres in the rural area. And there's no reference of the 5 or more permanent acquisitions. So I just want to bring that to your attention. The other thing that may not fall in this exact requirement area that may require might require a public meeting would be if it involves noise, or if there's substantial impact to traveling public or adjoining property owners or business areas. If it's a high-profile project with heavy public interest or have several parcels, it may require a public meeting regardless of any other requirements laid out in the EPG. And this public meeting would be at the approval of your DE, the PM working with the DE for their approval. So just be very well aware of the section 129 in the public involvement as you're working through your projects and the type of acquisitions that you're going to be making. The other thing is the notice of public hearing is to be published at a minimum of 5 to 12 calendar days prior to the date of hearing. So these are just some areas that we wanted to keep in mind as you work through the timeline of your project and make sure you hit these milestones. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Schrader.
Yes, hello everyone. This is Tim Schrader, and I'm a design liaison engineer in the design division. Commission approval of location and design is covered in EPG section 129, which is public involvement. As you can see on the screen, and as Mendy just pointed out, the EPG has a threshold of guidance for determining when a public meeting is required. You can see once again these criteria, both current and proposed, on your screen right now. This criteria is considered a minimum level for which a public meeting is required. It may be desirable to have a meeting to advise local officials, adjacent property owners, and other users of the details of the project. And it's an important opportunity to gain comment from the public concerning the improvements and outline a proposed solution to an identified transportation need. So feel free to include your design liaison in discussions about whether or not a public meeting is necessary. Just want to let you know we're here to help you with that. You could take me to the next slide, please. Okay, this slide is the commission agenda checklist or backup schedule. I hope you've seen it before. It's important to navigate your project schedule carefully when your project requires a location and design approval. As a project manager, you need to target a commission meeting date that falls after the approved preliminary plans and before the anticipated right-of-way plan approval date. Please note from this agenda checklist schedule chart that you're required to submit your documents to central office more than 5 weeks prior to the targeted commission meeting date in order to be placed on the agenda. There are a number of levels of central office review that are involved, which is why it takes 5 weeks to do that. It's a best practice when setting a public meeting date that you choose a date that allows you to hold a public meeting and allow a 2-week comment period and then some time for you as the PM to compile your submittal to central office for review and meet this schedule on this chart. In other words, your public meeting should be set backwards from this chart to make sure you can meet this schedule. If you just miss this schedule and you can't make up that lost time, then you may be forced to wait another month, and that's time that most of the time we can't afford to lose. So I just want to emphasize that to you as a best practice. Please consult this chart and kind of factor that in when you're scheduling your public meetings. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, when submitting a project for location and design approval to central office, 5 items are required. There's a public meeting transcript, there's an executive summary, there's a commission backup form, a project location sketch, and a conflict of interest form. Of these items, the commission backup form, which is what you see on the screen right now, and the location sketch are the documents that actually are presented to the commissioners. Therefore, they earn the most scrutiny. A sample location sketch is found in the EPG in section 129. Please try to match the formatting and the color coordination on that sample as best you can. That would be a great help to everyone. And then most importantly, there are instructions in the EPG on how to complete the commission backup form. And the instruction form is what you see in front of you. The items that you all see in red are tips or guidance or instructions on how to fill out the form. The commission secretary's goal is to have all these documents presented to the commissioners and have them appear identical in format. So again, please follow the instructions carefully as they appear in red on this form. If you're new and you've never completed this form, we have plenty of perfected and approved samples available in Design Division. Just ask your liaison and we can assist you to obtain some. That's all I have. I'll now turn the presentation over to Jonathan Barnes.
Hi guys, I'm Jonathan Barnes. I'm the right-of-way manager for St. Louis District. I'm going to talk about the project scope today and how that affects the timing of the project and the cost of the project as far as right-of-way is concerned. So I'm sure you've all seen that the right-of-way process, if you've been involved in right-of-way acquisition on any of your projects, you've seen that it can be a lengthy process and it can also be a costly process. So if you keep some of these things in mind that I'm going to talk about today, it may reduce the time as well as the money that we end up spending in right-of-way. So some of the things to consider, there are things in a project that are must-haves and there are things that it would be nice to have. For instance, if you have a 2-lane road and you're expanding it to 4 lanes and there's a bunch of houses next door to the road, then obviously you're probably going to have to buy these houses out to expand it to 4 lanes. So that's a must-have. And there's other things that it's always nice to have, like access management. If you could eliminate some entrances along a route and, it's better for the traveling public if you have fewer entrances, but you don't have to have that necessarily to accomplish the scope of your project. These are things to keep in mind because sometimes buying a house in the right-of-way world is easier than buying a strip or an easement in front of someone's property or taking their access if it's not absolutely necessary. And those things can take time. So some of the items to consider that we've been seeing a lot lately are changes in access rights, entrance changes, or landlocking parcels. We don't see the landlocking too often, but it just looks good on paper to reduce the size. Maybe they've got a 40-foot entrance and you'd like to reduce it down to a 20-foot entrance for some reason or another. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but it may be a big deal to that property owner. It may not look like it's very expensive, but it can cost a lot of time, and we could possibly end up going into condemnation. Not saying you don't do that, but it's just something to consider if you're on a tight time frame or a tight budget. A big thing that we have seen lately is parking impacts because we're doing a lot of ADA projects in urban areas that have a lot of businesses. So say they have parking out in front and you just need a 5-foot wide temporary easement along your entire sidewalk. Maybe there's 50 parcels. Well, your temporary easement's going through all these parking spots. And I know that the contractor's only going to be there for a few days, but we have to consider the length of the entire project, usually being 1 or 2 construction seasons, and we end up having to pay them for basically 2 years of loss of parking. And it really has added a lot of time to some of our negotiations. Now, if you do need to do that, one thing to consider is, can you do a JSP to maybe require the contractor to work at night or outside of their business hours? These are things that could help the negotiations. Another thing would be circuity of travel. Let's say that you're changing an outer road into a one-way outer road. And if we're not buying any easements from anyone along there, we don't have to offer any compensation to any of those owners. However, if we get a small temporary easement, all of a sudden that brings that into the conversation where they think they're going to lose business and they may hold us up. So if you can avoid getting an easement from that property owner at all and stay on our right-of-way, then that conversation never has to happen. These types of things, really, if you just consult with your right-of-way department as you're designing the project, these things can be taken care of early on, and we can discuss it and hopefully save some time and money later on down the road. Other things to pay special attention to, if you're hitting homeowners associations or condominiums, even with a small easement, sometimes, let's say there's 300 houses in a homeowners association, the way that their indentures are written, sometimes like all of them have to sign, or a majority of those owners have to sign, which can be a very lengthy process. So again, if you're going to hit any of these types of properties and you know it, consult with the right-of-way department, and they can do some research on the title and find out what the requirements will be. And maybe that's something that you might need to design around if it's going to be a lengthy process. We've seen where we had to condemn entire subdivisions just because there was no way of getting everyone to sign. Gas stations, convenience stores, if at all you can avoid them, great. But just think of it from the property owner's perspective when you're designing. And if you own that gas station, how would this project impact, bringing fuel in and out, customers getting in and out of the gas pumps, these types of things, because they can get very costly if we do go to condemnation as well. I think that's all I have. And now I'll turn it over to Brenda Harris again.
Thanks, Jonathan. We're going to talk about right-of-way schedules now. Adhering to a good schedule means failure or success in delivering a project. Every staff member who has a role in delivering a project, whether it be drawing the plans to buying the right-of-way to clearing the utilities, should be involved in the development of the project schedule. The scope of a project should be finished at this point, as it will help the team to determine the complexity of the project, and as Jonathan mentioned, some of those special criteria that could cause time delays. Typically, it takes 1 year to purchase right-of-way on a simple, uncomplicated project with 10 or less parcels. If the acquisitions include corporations, franchises, complex parcels with tenants, such as in apartment buildings, those acquisitions take a lot longer to deliver. Next slide, please, Mindy. This chart indicates some of the tasks specific to right-of-way delivery. As we've already mentioned about the public hearing and the requirements for that and the approval of the location and design, the areas highlighted in the darker color are outside of the right-of-way group's control, meaning they involve the project managers, environmental, or some other area, maybe survey and utilities. Some tasks the right-of-way perform are governed by law, such as a property owner has the right to consider an offer for 30 days. Property owners also have 60 days from the date of the offer before the Commission or MHTC can file for condemnation. These are all governed by law. Other timelines to consider are condemnation itself. In today's environment, with the COVID delaying several of the court systems, it's taking at least 4 months to get a hearing date for condemnation. Typically, a court has 30 days to schedule a hearing, but in today's environment, it's taking a lot longer. The courts historically have responded to the Commission's petition filing within 2 weeks. And after the hearing takes place in the court system, commissioners are normally immediately appointed. Then they can view the property and set the compensation that MoDOT can pay into court, and then we can take possession of the property within 2 more weeks. This is not the case in today's environment, which is why it's really important that you include the right-of-way staff and even legal counsel who will be condemning or handling the condemnation procedures in the project schedules. The commissioners who are unrelated and uninvolved in a project are appointed by the judge. These are usually local individuals who are part of that county, and they will determine the just compensation deserved and which will be paid to the property owners. The commissioners have 45 days to go out, view the property, ask any questions, and determine what we call an award. The award replaces the appraisal of just compensation, and we have seen in some cases where the award is less than the appraised value. So what does this mean for your schedules today? If there's condemnation on a project, legal counsel, chief counsel's office, and regional counsel has asked that you include 8 months to condemn for property. So if you have a controversial project, or even what we consider a confused title where we're not sure who owns the property and it will take some research, 8 months to determine that through a court system is what our legal counsel is requesting. Other items I want to mention are A-date requests and clearances. We cannot request A-dates until we have environmental clearance. Environmental clearances are also taking some time to process. Those are things that you have to consider in the schedule and back into it. We're going to talk about that later on. Melissa Shepperly will be reporting on the environmental portion. Central office right-of-way typically responds to an A-date request within 24 hours, but a federal highway has 2 weeks to respond to an A-date request according to our partnering agreement. But if something is controversial or something is not making sense, federal highway can refuse to process that A-date. It goes back into the system and the time frame starts over. So it's very important that we have everything in place before we submit an A-date. Clearing a project should happen at the PS&E, which is 10 weeks from the date of advertisement, unless it's a PODI project, and a PODI project requires 14 weeks. A project is usually advertised for a 7-week period, but if we have delays in obtaining physical possession of a parcel, we can advertise for 3 weeks. However, you don't expect to get great bids on that advertisement because the less time you give the contractor to consider a project, the higher the cost is going to be. If advertisement is shortened, it has been proven that we get poor bids. Conditional clearances are an option, but not normal practice. It can be utilized in the event that offers have been made, deeds have been executed, and perhaps we're waiting on a payroll to be processed. Another delay we've seen since the COVID is delayed payrolls. That's because we have to go through Office of Administration in order to obtain vendor numbers to process payments. There is no fast way to clear a project at this point in time. But either way, MoDOT must have all physical and legal possession of all properties before it can be advertised. Next, we're going to talk about preparing cost estimates. This can be found in section of the EPG 236.3.3.2. Estimates are very important when we're looking at right-of-way expenses. All right-of-way costs shall be prepared by the district right-of-way, the district design engineer, or project manager in conjunction with each other. When estimates are prepared accurately, it allows for better budgeting, which in turn is the best use of the taxpayers' dollars. For example, if historically a district has been putting $10,000 in a project under right-of-way costs, but then the project ultimately does not have right-of-way impacts, that $10,000 has been tied up and could have been used on other projects. The overall picture, $10,000 is not that much money. However, if you look at it on a statewide basis or across 450 projects that happen every year, programming right-of-way accurately is extremely important. So updates, estimate updates should be done during project stages and milestones. Take note, the first one would be the project development stage, which communicating to the right-of-way staff the type of improvement being considered, the length of the project, the width of the right-of-way, the type and location of potential interchanges or at-grade crossings, the type and extent of access acquisition. It would help for the right-of-way staff to have aerial photographs with maps, with proposed lines, anything that can be provided to the right-of-way group to prepare an accurate right-of-way estimate. The next stage or milestone would be the project initiation stage. So estimates at the project initialization stage should be prepared in as much detail as possible. This is where the scope has extended and become a proposed STIP a STIP addition to the upcoming 5-year STIP. We're talking about maybe a year out from joining into the STIP. And then finally, the last stage would be the project on the approved program. So when the project hits the STIP and reconsidering all the impacts that could be happening, as much detail as possible. And this estimate needs to be updated before the year the project is happening. So estimates can be updated to change the right-of-way programmed amount. However, it would take a STIP amendment in order to change the right-of-way cost within a project. It's much better if you can look at that project before the program year and update that estimate before then. Some things to consider for accurate estimates: the type of land, whether it's agricultural, residential, commercial, industrial, those type of specific details about land can help with right-of-way cost. Those costs can vary quite a bit. Estimate unit values should be supported by market information. We try to use no older than 3-year market data. Typically, we try to use 1-year market data, which will give us the best available price to figure up estimates. The right-of-way staff are very in tune with how they need to reach out to realtors, lenders, real estate professionals, look at the historical environment. The other things to consider is what type of owners are you affecting? Are we, again, talking about corporations? If you're dealing with someone such as CVS Pharmacy, Walgreens, those take a lot of time to acquire due to their corporation being in another state. Some things to consider are damages, fencing. Are these fences retaining livestock? What will happen during a project if you remove that fence? Damages are another thing that are considered in an estimate. There's several things that could be, such as removing the type of access rights that a property owner currently has, even if it's a non-residential and it could be just a farm entrance. Are they bringing heavy equipment in and out of that entrance? And if you change it or put any entrances in on a curve, are they going to be able to enter that field entrance with their big equipment? The next item we'll talk about is the use of right-of-way consultants and when to use right-of-way consultants. Over the last 3 years, we've put in place, central office has developed a process of using right-of-way consultants. We're calling this, you can use on-call consultants or you can solicit for consultants for right-of-way service. So the reason for the consultant use is when project workloads exceed the ability of the district right-of-way staff to deliver a project due to extreme use of resources. Some projects have seen staff levels depleting due to retirements or moving on to other positions. Right-of-way services do not fall under the David's Law as they are not considered a professional service. So procedures are different from engineering services. Again, within the EPG under 236.3.12, it goes into more detail on how to use right-of-way services. The central office has the process all detailed in the EPG. There's approved rosters available that have available appraisers, consultants that offer the complete right-of-way packages, negotiators, and those are all located on the central office SharePoint site. On-call consultants can be utilized for any portion of a project, whether it be, again, for appraisal services, negotiation, relocation functions, and the use of the DBC funds can pay for those. Unless the DBC funds has been used for another portion of the same project, the $200,000 cap of the DBC funds, again, needs to be communicated between the design departments, the right-of-way departments, engineering, other areas such as utilities or surveying. All those areas can be used for the DBC portion, even environmental. If the DBC funds have already been used, the right-of-way staff can solicit for consultant services, and there's also a process available for that as well. It's important to have right-of-way plans completed prior to hiring a consultant, so the cost of services the consultant will provide is accurate. The district right-of-way staff will need to be involved in the solicitation with the assistance of central office right-of-way. It's important to realize the district right-of-way staff is very involved in providing the oversight to consultants and looking at the products the consultants are using, as well as the type of acquisitions and processes they are performing. Use of right-of-way consultants has been very successful over the last couple of years, and it can be used as an important tool to deliver projects when overload of other projects are occurring within the districts. I will now turn it over to Mindy for another question.
Yes, thank you, Brenda. Just to get an idea before we turn it over to Aaron Disler with ODA, we're just curious how many of you have worked with ODA staff on a project to billboard? Aaron, it looks like you're going to have a group of people all ears ready to hear all about this. So this is a good indication. All right, Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Mindy. I'm Aaron Disler. I'm an outdoor advertising specialist here at MoDOT. We're going to discuss the ODA, the outdoor advertising moratorium. So state law basically says that a moratorium of new outdoor advertising permits is imposed within the outdoor advertising control area for that section of highway scheduled for construction or reconstruction where funding for right-of-way acquisition is approved by the commission under the STIP. So what exactly does that mean? So let's say that $1,000 is programmed for right-of-way on a resurfacing project that's, say, 20 miles long. All new sign applications that are received that fall within that 20-mile stretch of highway will be denied until the project has been completed and that there is a passing final inspection with no requested changes or corrections. So even if we maybe don't anticipate using any type of right-of-way money to be used on that specific project, that $1,000 placeholder for just in case we may need to use right-of-way money creates a moratorium of new outdoor advertising permits and therefore new sign structures. So overall, the main point here is that a project that does have right-of-way funding associated with it results in a moratorium of new outdoor advertising permits that fall within that specific project's limits. And then once the project has been completed and there is a passing final inspection, that moratorium has been lifted. Moving on to the next slide is a map showing the 6 outdoor advertising areas along with the current contact information for each specialist. It might be a little bit hard to read, so I apologize for that, but you can also find this contact information on the MoDOT Interactive Contacts map or the MoDOT's public website as well, modot.org. So if you do have any questions about the moratorium or for existing billboards or signs that are already built and will be impacted by a project, just reach out to the appropriate specialist and they will be able to help. And now I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Shepperly with Environmental Services.
This is Melissa Shepperly, Environmental Compliance Manager, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Request for Environmental Services, or the RES. EPG Article 127 outlines more specifics about the RES process and each type of resource that is reviewed. Refer to that article for more in-depth information. There are 4 stages of design: location conceptual, preliminary plans, right-of-way, and final design. The RES mirrors these stages, and depending on the type of project, a submittal for each stage may be required. For very minor types of projects like overlays or job order contracts, a minimum of 2 submittals, location conceptual and final design, may only be needed. This does not apply to any projects that involve bridge work or new right-of-way or easements. The location conceptual RES is required to be submitted for all projects. It should be submitted when the project is added to the STIP. This allows staff to schedule work in a long-term capacity, knowing that projects are coming and when. The preliminary plans RES is submitted when preliminary plans are ready. They can be draft plans. They don't have to be signed. This is the most important RES submittal for our staff. This is the stage when field work is done based on those preliminary plans, so clearances and permits can get received by right-of-way stage. Many times, this is the stage NEPA is assigned and an A date can be given. If more in-depth permits and clearances are needed, it may not be until right-of-way stage. It is very important for district staff to understand that you cannot proceed to final design until the NEPA clearance date is given. The right-of-way RES is required to be submitted for all projects that have right-of-way. This can be permanent or temporary easements or permanent right-of-way. It should be submitted when the right-of-way plans are ready. Again, they don't have to be signed plans. Draft plans are fine. If NEPA wasn't given at the preliminary plan stage RES, it will be given at the right-of-way stage RES once clearances and permits are obtained. Once NEPA is given, the request for an A date can be made. The final RES is submitted when final plans are ready, or at least 60 days prior to PS&E. They can be draft plans. They don't have to be signed final plans. The 60 days is important because if some clearance or permit was not obtained yet, it gives staff time to potentially get those prior to the PS&E due date.
Yes, thanks, Melissa. Now we're going to go into the preliminary plans and kind of discuss some things that we've seen happen of lessons learned and what to look for and what to do. For preliminary plans, one thing that you want to make sure is verify these preliminary plans are based off new survey and not previous projects, or as-built plans, or going off and just taking a look at the project site and seeing where the roadbed is. This is a step that you do not want to skip as far as making sure the plans are based off the survey work. Make sure that that center line is reestablished. So this is something that it's a very risky thing to skip, especially if you are dealing with any kind of property rights. Every little bit counts when you're going out and meeting with property owners and acquiring anything from their property rights. If in doubt, you're not sure what to do, we know a lot of these project timelines are very tight. You're trying to do the best you can on a very tight timeline. That's what the liaisons are here for. Design liaison, right-of-way liaisons, pick up the phone, give us a call. Talk to your peers. If in doubt, just reach out if you have any questions. But just a note to self, please verify that the preliminary plans are based off this new survey. Next is another question for the group to mark. The question is, how do you receive property owner permission for access to conduct the following work? Survey, geotech, and environmental. We're curious how you go and notify them that you're coming out to do work. All right, I see a few trends here. All right, I'm going to go on to the next slide and we'll talk about how we instruct as well through the EPG on guidance, how to coordinate with the property owners. So no access to property is allowed before the property owner letter is sent. And the two types of property owner letters are in the EPG. One is a letter that's sent out before the project becomes a project. It's more of in the scoping phase. And the second is when it is approved by the commission and it is in the STIP and we have a project assigned. So there are two types of letters that are sent to the property owners. Letters to the property owners are sent by the project designer to cover typical access by MoDOT personnel from that time forward if any kind of digging does occur on their property. Surveyors are allowed to go out by law and do minor digging to locate any kind of monuments. So surveyors do have that access. Again, they have to wait for those property owner letters to be sent. If any kind of digging on the property occurs, with the exception, of course, of surveying, a right of entry agreement is to be signed by that property owner, such as work being done by geotechnical investigation, hazardous waste, and historic preservation investigations. So again, surveyors can go out and just dig for the monument, locate monuments. Anything beyond that and digging in the property has to be done with a signed right of entry agreement. If you have any questions regarding this, again, that's something that you can reach out to us for clarification on. Your survey folks, whoever you're coordinating with on this type of work, please reach out and ask questions of, making sure that those property owners have received those letters and if the right of entry agreement is needed, if that has been signed. All right, next I am going to turn it over to Greg Wood to discuss the advanced acquisition hardship buyout process.
Great, thank you, Mindy. Yes, the hardship and protective buying process. In extraordinary cases or emergency situations, consideration may be given to acquisition of hardship or protective buys within the limits of the proposed highway corridor prior to completion of the final environmental impact statement or adoption of the appropriate environmental document. This can occur, but only after MoDOT has given official notice to the public that a particular location has been selected to be the preferred or recommended alignment for the proposed highway, or a public hearing has been held or an opportunity for such hearing has been afforded. Proper documentation is to be submitted to show that the acquisition is in the public's interest and is necessary to be considered for a hardship or a protective buy. A hardship is considered to alleviate a particular hardship to a property owner in contrast to other property owners. For example, the property owner must request early acquisition and state the basis of the hardship request. The basis of determining a hardship will generally fall into the area of physical and/or economic problems. Physical problems could include age, health, disability, and/or other extraordinary conditions. Economic problems include a wide range of financial disadvantages or personal financial losses that are beyond the relocatee's capability to resolve. A protective buy is used to prevent imminent development, which would tend to limit the choice of highway location alternatives. Once these considerations have been vetted with central office right-of-way, central office will work closely with Federal Highway to gain concurrence prior to moving forward. Once approved, the Transportation Project Manager will request an A date. Please follow the EPG on the required documentation for that A date. Upon receipt of the A date, conceptual plans, and certification, Central Office right-of-way will review and then advise the district when the acquisition process may begin. If the parcel cannot be acquired through negotiations, the district shall rescind the offer in writing to the property owner and advise Central Office right-of-way of such action so the previously requested funding can be deobligated with financial services. One thing to mention here is that 4F property cannot be acquired through hardship or early acquisitions. And Kenny, I believe you're up next.
Thanks, Greg. I'm Kenny Voss, the Assistant State Design Engineer. I will be talking about the process for moving a project letting date. We all have the same goal of delivering projects on time. It's a team effort. Delivering projects requires coordination of several functions of MoDOT, including right-of-way, which we are discussing today. If your project schedule changes, it impacts the resources and planning of all of these functions. Delivering projects in the month they are scheduled improves MoDOT's efficiency. But sometimes there are unforeseen risks in a project that require additional resources or time. When this happens, ask for help. Communicate the risk in your district project status meeting. Communicate the risk with your central office liaison. When we communicate risk early, we may be able to shift resources to get the project back on schedule. If we can't get the project back on schedule, we can reallocate resources to other projects. There are two critical deadlines that have a larger organizational impact. The first is MoDOT STIP. MoDOT STIP is a public commitment for delivering projects in the fiscal year they are programmed. MoDOT's goal is to meet all the commitments each year. If a project moves out of the current fiscal year, the district engineer will be asked to explain the change at the annual management review of STIP. So make sure your district engineer is informed of any moves of projects out of the fiscal year. MoDOT's budget and STIP are based on obligating all federal transportation funds available to Missouri each federal fiscal year. So making sure that the projects that we committed to within the federal fiscal year are important so that we spend all of our federal funds each year. November letting is the last month to get federal obligations in before the end of the federal fiscal year. MoDOT's Financial Services Division assumes that all projects in the months of September, October, and November will be let on time unless they are informed otherwise. As I said earlier, any potential delays need to be communicated as soon as possible so that adjustments can be made to the budget and to the schedule and resources of all those involved with delivering projects. I can't emphasize enough that it's important to communicate early and often. Things happen. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Right-of-way acquisition authority. While work is taking place to submit the A date or right-of-way acquisition authority, appraisers are also beginning to collect appraisal data. So once the A date is approved, appraisals can be finalized and offers can be presented to the property owners. So in order to request an A date, NEPA and SHPO clearance needs to be provided, approved right-of-way plans are necessary, and right-of-way funding must be programmed in the correct STIP and TIP year. Once those three pieces are in place, the district right-of-way staff can submit those documents to Central Office right-of-way. Central Office right-of-way will review the documents, and if everything is in order, then Central Office right-of-way will submit the request to Central Office Financial Services, which will be then run through Federal Highway for approval to obligate the right-of-way funds. From the time the Central Office right-of-way submits the request and until the Federal Highway provides approval, this could take up to 3 weeks. In late winter and early spring, Central Office right-of-way reaches out to the district right-of-way staff and asks if projects projects that are showing in the STIP as having right-of-way funding are actually in the current STIP or are really going to need the right-of-way funding, and if not, have it removed. If the district has not received a confirmation of the three items listed above, which again was the NEPA, the approved right-of-way plans, and the right-of-way funding in the current STIP or TIP year, then the right-of-way funding will need to be requested for the next fiscal year.
And I'm back on. Is the voice
much better?
Okay, awesome. All right, Jessica, you can probably turn. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. Now up is, thank you for covering, Brenda. Next up is Andy Ellsworth on talking about right-of-way plans.
Good afternoon. My name is Andy Ellsworth, and I'm a Senior Right-of-Way Specialist in the Southwest District. And as Mindy alluded to, I'm going to talk about kind of quality approved right-of-way plans so we can move forward to the A date. The quality of right-of-way plans and utilities addressed is an effort for us to get an A date. It's essential that the plans do not change when we begin meeting with property owners and we're getting FHWA approval. Need to make sure that the right-of-way manager reviews and approves the right-of-way plans prior to the DE's approval. Got a question coming up here on the next slide. Mindy, if you can go to the next slide.
Is it not showing? It's showing on my screen how project managers utilize core team meetings. Does everyone see that slide?
No, it's still on the right-of-way acquisition authority.
All right. Jessica, I'm assuming that I have the control.
Hang on 1 second.
Okay. I might have messed that up when I left and came back in. Awesome. Okay. Now does everyone see the question? Perfect. Thank you, Jessica. All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Andy, looks like you've gotten some good feedback that they do utilize those team meetings.
Definitely. I just wanted to touch on a couple of tools that will help get us to approve right-of-way plans, quality right-of-way plans where we don't have any issues and have to go back and do any redesign. Obviously, it shows that a lot of people have used them. The core team is basically a gathering of to gather data and analyze the need to identify potential solutions. Core team members come from different function units of the department. And the representatives of the different units each have a different areas of expertise and will have different expectations in the meetings. The core team usually will get together and provide data, and they'll get data in meetings, field checks. We'll get some public input, and then you have your own project development checklist that you'll use to help develop in the scope. The complete project scoping process involves a number of things. It helps determine the root causes of the need, developing a range of possible solutions to address the need, choosing the best solution, setting the physical limits of the project, accurately estimating the cost of the project, and of course forecasting the timeline and delivery schedule of the project. And as we all know, a good core team will help us eliminate kind of that scope creep, where we have a general idea of the project we want to do, and we make sure we don't make that larger and, of course, cost more. So a good core team will help us stay away from that. And, of course, it's essential that cooperation, communication, and coordination between the district design, including the project managers, the core team members, and district right-of-way to be maintained is essential to help development of the plans. On this next slide, we have the right-of-way plan checklist, which is in EPG 236.13.7. And this is a good tool to use as well because it gives the minimum requirements that we need to have on approved right-of-way plans so that we can get the acquisition date from FHWA. And I'll just go over a couple of these things. Obviously the date of the plans. We need some survey information, land ties, section, township, and range. Of course, we need right-of-way lines designated, either existing or new, permanent easement, temporary easement acquisitions, right-of-way acquisitions, access rights that we're going to acquire. So it just kind of gives you a list of things that are necessary in order for us to have on approved right-of-way plans, and that's a good little checklist to use to make sure that we have everything. Now, this next bullet point, common errors, I probably should change that and not really say errors, but maybe issues that come up on some right-of-way plans. And some of the things that we've run into are not having subdivision or lot lines on the plans. Those, of course, are land survey lines, so they need to be on there so that we can identify the certain subject parcels that we're dealing with. Sometimes we get plans that just have a quarter section line. We need to go a little bit deeper and have a quarter section line on there. Need to have topo improvements put on the plans. And then we also need to know if they're going to be removed or do not disturb, leave in place, or use in place. So, utility poles, signs, things like that need to be identified. Need to have the necessary entrance information, what type, width, station, grade, and then type of approach. And then we also have some confusion sometimes on access rights. So we need to make sure that we have the right symbols and notations on the plans, such as a hollowed cross are used for existing limited access, or a solid cross would be used for new limited access. And there should also be a solid dot on the plans to indicate where there could be a change in the access designation. A couple of other things, rounding should be consistent. So if you are going to round on the acquisition size, try to stay maybe in the tenth. This is as far as going out to the hundredths or thousandths place. And then takings that are under a tenth of an acre should probably consider using square footage as opposed to acreage on that. And of course, once we've got the plans developed and we're ready to move to that approved stage, the district engineer needs to sign and seal the right-of-way plans. So it's essential that they are on board with what's going on. And then through the course of negotiations and the development of plans, even after we get the 8.8, I know things come up There might be some changes that are necessary from the design side. Project manager might notice something that needs to change. And then the right-of-way department comes in and sometimes asks for changes to the plans after we've talked to property owners. So those changes need to be approved by obviously the project manager, but then they need to have concurrence from the district engineer as well. And a couple small things, obviously. So if we have issues with the plans, then we have some complications, such as it impacts the timeline of the project. It could impact our appraisal process on how we can get them completed. Utilities not being addressed, so that can become a concern and a timely concern as well. We have lack of confidence from the public on the plans and the project. And of course, we run into cost overruns and the estimate of the project. So a couple things that as we've alluded to before, we must have environmental clearance when we move to get the acquisition authority. And then another department that needs to be involved when we get our approved right-of-way plans is the survey department, so they can start writing the legal descriptions that we'll need to use in the acquisition phase. That's all I have, and so now I'm going to turn it over to Megan Atha.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about the appraisal process. Before I talk about that, I want to go over a few definitions and reasons why we do what we do. An appraisal is an act or process of developing an opinion of value. And an appraisal review is the act or process of developing and communicating an opinion about the quality of the work done by another appraiser on the original appraisal. So why are appraisals needed? As Brenda stated earlier, it's in the Fifth Amendment, so it's law. Private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. So in addition, we have the Uniform Act, the Code of Federal Regulations, and the Missouri state statutes. Next slide, please. So just compensation is the amount that's due to the owner, and the courts have held that market value is a good measurement of just compensation. Just compensation cannot be less than the market value, but it can be more when you include other things such as heritage value, homestead value, and relocation expenses. So there are many different definitions of fair market value, and it's important that it's defined which one that you're going to use for the assignment that you're asked to complete. So for any of our assignments, which are eminent domain assignments, the fair market value is defined in the Missouri state statutes as the value of the property taken after considering comparable sales in the area, capitalization of income, and replacement cost less depreciation. And it's based on the highest and best use of the property and using generally accepted appraisal practices. So that part is typical for most assignments, and this part next is where it differs for the eminent domain assignments. So if less than the entire property is taken, fair market value is the difference between the value immediately prior to the taking and the remaining immediately after the taking. So it's difference in the two values. So to the process now. The appraisal process begins once the right-of-way plans are completed or nearly complete. The first step that we usually do is to gather information on the property. And we usually look at the plans, review the plans, talk with the project manager and the designers to see what the impacts to the property will be. We'll search courthouse records for any information that we don't have already, and we'll do a preliminary search for comparable sales in the area. Step 2 is to contact the property owner. Typically, we would meet them on site and go through everything. Of course, this has been different lately, and so we've been doing it with a combination of phone and email. And during the meeting, we will discuss the project and the impacts of the property. Most times, the appraiser is the first contact that the owners have, and so they will use this meeting to express concerns that may not have been considered in the design. We can then take those concerns back to the designer for consideration. There's always any number of concerns expressed, but by far the big three are access during construction and after, drainage, and in the urban areas, parking. Another important thing to remember is that the typical person cannot read engineering plans. So it's really our job to explain it and to bring material with us that helps them understand what's going on and what the end result will be. After discussion with the owners and viewing the property, the appraiser starts the analysis and reporting process to determine the market value. One part of the analysis is to determine the property's highest and best use. This is the most profitable use the property has in a reasonably near future and is one of the biggest influences on value. The highest and best use isn't always its current use. For example, farm ground on the edge of an expanding city or single-family home along the city's main commercial corridor. Another part of the analysis is using the three approaches to value. All these approaches must be considered, but not all must be used. The first approach is sales comparison approach. This is the most commonly used and often seen as the best indicator of value. In this approach, you use other recent sales in the area. The second approach is the cost approach, and this is when you use the reproduction or replacement cost of the improvements, and then you would deduct any kind of depreciation. This then is added to the market value of the land to determine the value. You have to be careful using this approach because depreciation is subjective. Third approach is the income approach, which involves capitalizing a property's anticipated net income to derive a value. This is most commonly used on income-producing properties. So once you do all three of those, value is established for each approach, and then each of these values is analyzed and reconciled into an overall indication of market value for the subject. The fourth step is to write your report. We have three main valuation reports. We have the standard appraisal, which is used for complex properties. We have the value finding appraisal, which is used when the highest and best use of a property does not change. And then we have the waiver valuation, which is done only on very simple acquisitions and they're less than $10,000. The waiver valuation is not an appraisal and can be done by staff. Doesn't necessarily need to be done by a licensed appraiser. All right, next slide. Once the appraisal is completed, a review needs to be done. The purpose of the review is to ensure the appraisal is done properly and to determine just compensation. The standard and value finding appraisals must be reviewed by a licensed appraiser, and the waiver valuations can be reviewed by the right-of-way manager or another agency official. Step 6 is the approval of the just compensation. The agency official, which is typically the right-of-way manager, will determine what the just compensation due to the owners is. And then the last step is really not part of the appraisal process necessarily, but kind of goes with it, is the administrative settlement. So after negotiations occur and it's determined that the owner needs to receive any kind of amount over the initial offer, then the right-of-way manager needs to approve an administrative settlement. Next presenter will be Carl Davenport.
Good afternoon. I'm Carl Davenport. I'm a Central District Right-of-Way Manager. Negotiators are typically the face of MoDOT. They will typically have more interactions with owners than any other MoDOT employee. And essentially, the negotiator's job is to acquire all property rights necessary to clear a project. As Megan mentioned earlier, we want to acquire a right-of-way in fee simple title, meaning that we have acquired all rights in that property. But we also do not call that right-of-way in the deed, that does imply an easement. So in our deeds, we always refer to it as land, and we refer to boundary lines and not right-of-way lines. And as she also mentioned earlier, permanent easements are important. If there are existing easements, that those easements are read to ensure that whatever rights we need are covered by those. And if it's for a use other than that specific use, we'll also need to acquire additional rights in order to proceed. Before an offer is made, there's several preliminary things that need to be done. We will order and review title commitments. A title commitment will tell us any property rights that have been recorded pertaining to that property. The negotiator will read the appraisal. This will not only help them understand the valuation process, but it will also mention if there are any other interests that might have been mentioned by the landowner to the appraiser that are not recorded. And the appraisal will also discuss any specific owner concerns so that the negotiator is prepared for their meeting. They'll also prepare all the documents that are necessary to acquire those rights, the deeds, releases, and letters of offer. And with the COVID situation, there's probably more offers being made now by mail, but we also still do a lot in person. Regardless of the format, there are several things that the negotiator will provide at the initial contact. One is the Pathways for Progress brochure. This is an overview of the entire appraisal process, explains it from beginning to end. The negotiator will review the title information that was shown in the title commitment and the appraisal to make sure that there are no other interests in the property that are maybe unrecorded or that are not of record. The negotiator will also explain the right-of-way plans, provide a plan sheet, and go over the impacts of the taking and or the acquisition and on the remainder of the property. And at this time, we'll also discuss specifics such as grade changes, any trees that will be removed, access changes, entrance shifts, things like that. And those items are very important to landowners. So if we are affecting entrances, especially if the access is going to change, it's important that the negotiator know that information from design and the rationale behind that so that they can explain that to the landowners. Additionally, we'll explain again the entire acquisition process and provide copies of all the documents that will be needed. We'll provide a pro rata real estate tax claim and explain the proration of taxes. MoDOT will reimburse landowners on a prorated basis for the real estate taxes for that year based on the percentage of impact that our acquisition has on them. We'll provide a written letter of offer, and that is actually mandated by the Uniform Act and the Code of Federal Regulations, that offer must include a breakdown between land and improvements and damages to remainder. And our commission policy is that we also must show the grade of entrances in that letter of offer. We will provide a copy of the appraisal or the waiver evaluation and discuss that with the owner. We'll provide the actual conveyance documents that we will need to get signed. And, of course, we will answer any questions that they have. And if everything goes smoothly, hopefully leading towards a settlement, we'll also need a vendor input form, which actually is a form that where they provide their information, such as Social Security numbers, so we can get any payment processed and so we can pay them for the acquisition. Basically, we're there to acquire property rights from that owner, and it was also mentioned earlier about the difference between a warranty deed and a quitclaim deed. We want to acquire everything on a warranty deed. That means that the owner is, guaranteeing title, that they have good title to that property. A quitclaim deed essentially says they're quitclaiming whatever interest they have in that property. If they have good title, they convey the same thing, but like I said, our policy is we'll take warranty deeds when we acquire that land. In addition to the landowner, there's also many times other property rights that need to be acquired, or interests that need to be extinguished. These can be leases, easements. Easements can be written or prescriptive, and the prescriptive easement term may have been something some of you all have heard on our ADA project. That basically is an easement that is created by use, where someone has used the property for access for a number of years. There's nothing written down, but the fact that they've done it and used it and they've been allowed to do that creates a right in that property that we need to extinguish. These types of easements can be recorded or unrecorded. Again, we'll have that conversation with the landowners to make that determination. There can also be deeds of trust on the property that typically our title companies will handle those as far as getting partial deeds of releases. Sometimes there are other issues such as delinquent taxes, things like that we need to address as we proceed with getting the settlements paid. But any of these interests that are there in the acquisition area, we have to obtain some type of release or deed for those to make sure that the property is clear for settlement. I also want to mention that easement acquisitions also require these waivers. This is not just for permanent right-of-way. An example of this would be strip malls on ADA projects or any project, but it seems like it's fairly common on ADA projects where there could be 6 to 8 or more different businesses in a strip mall. A lot of times we're affecting access to those. In cases like that, a lot of times those tenants are actually more impacted than the landowners. So we do need to acquire some type of waiver from them because they have an interest in that property, and we need to make sure that they're aware of the project and the impact on that property, and that they have signed off on that. There can also be tenant-owned improvements in the right-of-way that we need. Most common one of these would be billboards. In situations like that, we prepare a tenant letter of offer. And then when we talk to the property owners, we will provide them with a disclaimer of interest, which basically means that we're asking them to disclaim their interest in that tenant-owned structure. Hopefully they'll sign it. If they don't, then we will present our offer to the tenant along with that disclaimer, and we can ask them to try to obtain that disclaimer so we can move forward in making a settlement with the tenant owner. For billboards, we can either purchase those or enter into reset agreements. Either way, they are signing some type of release that they're extinguishing their leasehold in that property. One thing to remember is that on settlements where you have landowners and tenants, we can clear tenant interest without clearing the fee owner as long as we have that disclaimer, but we cannot clear the fee owner without clearing the tenant. In other words, we can make a settlement with, say, a sign company, pay them, we're done with them, but if we can't reach an agreement with the landowner, we can move forward as long as that waiver was signed. Conversely, if we can't do it the other way, because if we have to condemn the property, if we've taken a deed for that, you're trying to condemn an interest on that real estate, and there's a risk that we might end up having to pay twice for the land. So, we cannot clear that fee owner without clearing the tenant. Now, there are a lot of things that can go wrong in this process that can delay negotiations. Here's a list of just a few that's happened in our district over the last 2 or 3 years. We had an owner that was in the hospital that was back and forth actually for over a month. We had a property that was owned by 2 brothers and our negotiator called one of them, and it turned out the other brother had died the day before. So clearly that was not the time they were wanting to deal with us. We've had owners who were over-the-road truck drivers gone for weeks at a time. They get back late on Friday night and leave early Monday morning. We had an owner traveling nationwide to trade shows. We've had owners die with unknown heirs. We had an owner who was declared incompetent and who had a court-appointed conservator, which you would think the court-appointed conservator could sign anything, but that's not the case. They actually have to sign and then have a court hearing to approve that. And also had an owner who went to Aruba and was going to stay there for 3 months. And obviously, they were not too concerned about our project. We had one that actually might not ever be topped as far as number of things that could go wrong. We had some owners who had died years ago. They had, I believe, 6 children. One of them had died, and they had kids that were minors. So we had at least 14 multi-generational heirs. Some were unknown. The family members were, some didn't get along with others. We were trying to track down all these people to get the signatures from them. And again, they didn't know where they were. They didn't want to know where some were, but they did know one was residing in the Nebraska State Penitentiary. So when you have situations like that, you're probably not going to get everybody signed. So in that particular case, we talked to design. This was for a sidewalk easement at the intersection of a city street and our route. We were able to basically make a design change and reduce the radius at that intersection and pull that in enough where we no longer needed to have that acquisition there. But in cases like that, sometimes condemnation is required to clear title, and that obviously extends the time frame of getting properties cleared. It was mentioned earlier that we cannot file condemnation for at least 30 days until after the offer has been made. And the 60-day notice was mentioned earlier. That time frame can run, those time frames can run concurrently, but at a minimum, they have to have at least 30 days to consider that offer before we could file for condemnation. We also have a policy that we will offer mediation prior to filing condemnation. That process can take a while to get the mediator lined up and get the hearings held. And obviously, condemnation can take, 4 to 6 months, if not longer. In addition to that, when we have properties that relocation's involved, landowners can have up to anywhere from 90 to 100 days from the time we make payment, if it's an owner-occupant, where they can retain possession of the property. So all those things obviously impact the time frame of these projects. As the negotiator is making their contacts with whether it's the landowner or tenant owners, they prepare a negotiators report. The front page is basically a summary of everything pertaining to that parcel, and then there's a narrative written of each conversation that they have. Those can be very helpful in the future if something comes up. But every contact is documented, and eventually those reports will be uploaded into eProjects. So if there is anything that needs to be reviewed on that, there's access to that to see what kind of conversations were had. A few years ago, there was some legislation on condemnation, and there were 2 items in that are worth noting. One is called homestead taking. This actually uses a term that we prefer not to use, of taking. We prefer to use the word acquisition, but this is actually in the statute, so I left it as homestead taking. And this is any taking of a dwelling owned by the property owner and functioning as the owner's primary place of residence, or any taking of the owner's property within 300 feet of the owner's primary place of residence that prevents the owner from utilizing property in substantially the same manner it is currently being utilized. So basically, if we're taking somebody's house or getting within 300 feet of it, this applies, and we will add, as a settlement, an additional 25% to the approved fair market value. Carriage value, the definition of that is the value assigned to any real property, including but not limited to real property owned by a business enterprise with fewer than 100 employees that has been owned within the same family for 50 or more years, and such value to be 50% of fair market value. So again, if it can be any property owned for 50 years, whether it's a small corporation or family, it doesn't have to be the exact owner. As long as it's a family-owned property, it's been in their family for 50 or more years, they're entitled to an extra 50%. These two items, that's in the condemnation law, and that applies to condemned parcels. But obviously, if owners have situations like that and they can get that there, they would never settle with us. So we always make administrative settlements in these cases to avoid condemnation. Also, on donations, owners do have the right to donate property, but we're required to make them aware of their right to an appraisal to determine fair market value. That, again, is in the Uniform Act. Basically, when that happens, we will explain their rights. We'll include that in a letter that we ask the owners to sign to verify that they have been made aware of those rights and that they're willing to proceed with the donation. That applies to any owner with the exception of government agencies. It's also specified in the EPG that while donations are acceptable, there can be no coercion of any kind. And typically they would talk about coercion could be telling owners that they have to donate, or we're not going to proceed, or it's going to delay the project, things like that. It has to be, basically just explain the process to them and asking them if they're willing to do that, and having them sign off and move forward, again, with no coercion. I do want to point out that the acquisition process is the same for easements as it is for right-of-way. I've heard statements over the years that, this shouldn't take as long because it's just an easement. Well, the process is the same, with the exception being for donations. If sometimes we can get those without doing the appraisal. But whether it's a temporary easement, permanent, or permanent right-of-way, the acquisition process is the same. And as I mentioned, a lot of times those temporary easements involve a lot of other interests that we need to acquire. So basically, what are the takeaways from this presentation? Basically, we want to make sure everybody's aware that parcels can be much more complicated than they appear on the surface. There can be multiple property rights to acquire on a single parcel. It's important to know that property owners' priorities are not our priorities. We're concerned about clearing a project on time. Owners are typically concerned about money, how we're impacting their property. They don't care that if we don't get a deed signed by next week, we're going to have to move this project. And, it doesn't impact them if we're even have to change fiscal years. So, again, they don't necessarily have the same concerns we do. There are countless things that can delay or impact clearing a project, and there are several required time frames, such as the notices and relocation time frames that are mandated, and there's no way around those. Estimating time needed for right-of-way is difficult because, before we get into a project, we just don't know what we're going to encounter. So basically, all these issues affect one thing, and that's time. We need adequate time for the process to be completed, and it's hard to make up time in the negotiation process. That needs to be done earlier in the process. It's important to involve right-of-way staff when you're scheduling your projects. Include them in core teams. That's been mentioned before. It's also important to identify projects with acquisitions and try to work on those first. Like all these things, they just add up, and it's difficult to pressure landowners into into doing these things quickly, so it's better to do that on the front end. We need to clear these projects by the PS&E date. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things that have to be done in that time frame to meet that date. So that's essentially an overview of the negotiation process. Now I'll turn it over to Mindy and Greg to talk about the certification of right-of-way plans.
All right, we can, Kenny, did you have anything that you wanted to add? All right, we're going to go ahead and start talking about the certification of right-of-way plans. Greg and I are going to tag team this slide. If there is any threat of condemnation when acquiring right-of-way plans must be approved and certified by the Commission. You will work with your design and right-of-way liaisons to email supporting documentation to the RW Cert email group. The link to the backup schedule, as Tim mentioned before, is what you need to shoot for on when you need to have this approved by the Commission. It takes up to 45 days from the deadline until the Commission meeting date, and all of this is detailed out in the EPG under the 236.13. The forms that I'm mentioning are the schedule that we showed before on Tim's slide, and the forms here are what need to be completed and emailed to the RW Cert, and again, as well as the approved, signed, and sealed right-of-way plans from the DE. And this is where you'll work with your design liaison, right-of-way liaison, with any questions regarding that.
That's correct. And those three forms that are required are the right-of-way plan certification. For right-of-way plan certification is the cover letter, the certification form, and the approved and signed right-of-way plans, obviously signed by the district engineer. Location and design approval date, as discussed previously, may or may not apply depending on the amount of right-of-way being acquired. That approval must take place prior to the Commission certifying the right-of-way plans. The right-of-way certification of plans process may also apply to LPA or cost share projects when approved become the Commission's after the project is complete. So just be aware of that fact. And then when right-of-way plans are needed to be recertified due to any right-of-way plan edits or changes to parcels, the right-of-way plans will need to go back through the Commission certification approval process again. Next up is Brenda regarding mediation.
Yes, I just wanted to remind everyone that in the event this goes over 2:30, the video will proceed on and you will get additional credit through Mo.U. So let's talk about mediation. When negotiations are unsuccessful, the mediation process can be utilized in an effort to avoid condemnation. It's important for a project manager, designer, negotiator, and the right-of-way manager to be available during the mediation meeting. Legal counsel is only needed when the property owner brings their own counsel. We have an approved roster for mediators located on our central office right-of-way SharePoint site in the event a district needs mediation services. However, if there is a mediator outside of that approved roster, it is a small process to get them approved. The mediator should be allowed 2 weeks to respond to the request for services. The mediation process also involves a neutral third party who assists in resolving the disagreement or situation that is preventing the parcel from settling. The mediation process does not involve a hearing or court reporter, and there is no judgment. Once the mediation meeting is complete, the cost for their services, the mediator services, will be submitted to the district right-of-way staff for invoice processing. If the parcel cannot be settled with mediation process, it will be then submitted to MoDOT legal counsel assigned to the project for condemnation proceedings. Greg, you're up next to talk about relocation.
Thank you, Brenda. We wanted to share this information to help you understand potential risks to your project as it pertains to relocation, regarding timelines, delayed possessions, and sequencing of construction activity. The goal of the Relocation Assistance Program is to provide an orderly and humane relocation of persons displaced by a project, as well as keeping any adverse impacts or costly delays to a minimum. So the types of relocation we encounter is residential, classified as residential or business. Most commonly residential in the urban areas, but in rural areas, but in urban areas, obviously it's business. General relocation requirements and activities include relocation planning, advisory services, relocation notices, availability of comparable replacement dwellings, and claims for relocation payments. Replacement dwellings must be decent, safe, and sanitary, otherwise the acronym is DSS, functionally equivalent, and of adequate size. Documentation is essential in the relocation process. There is no waiver of relocation assistance, so it's a necessary evil. Some examples of relocation we've encountered recently, that I personally have encountered recently, is the Buck O'Neill Bridge, Route 169, downtown Kansas City. Down there have been warehouses. There have been businesses that are being entirely relocated to a new location. We've had some impacts to parking and such, as you've heard earlier on in the presentation. Other areas of the state, there's been residential. That could be as simple as a bird bath, the mailbox. I believe the Northwest District had a scenario where there were several structures on a property where the owner stored barn lumber. So we had to find a location for that to then be stored in the interim. Several years ago, KC acquired a hotel that had long-term occupants with their families living at the hotel. So that obviously created some complexities that we had to endure, and it was just very, very time-consuming. So the earlier you can recognize some of those complexities in the process, the better we can get involved and get our hands around what needs might be necessary to accommodate those relocations. That's all I have. Jason, I believe you're up next.
Thanks, Craig. Good afternoon. My name is Jason Say. I'm Regional Counsel in St. Louis. I also work with the Right-of-Way Department on some agreements that they've put together and the outdoor advertising section. I'm going to run through some of the condemnation pitfalls that can create hang-ups in your timeline. I know a lot of this has already been covered, so I'll try not to be redundant. I really just want to focus on where it would be relevant to project delays and that sort of thing. You were told, that you have to go 60 days out from when the property owner gets a letter notifying them of the project. And that letter contains a bunch of information about what their rights are and what's available to them. And one of the things that they have the right to do is propose a design change if they feel that, their property is unfairly impacted or they think something else will be better. And we are required by law to consider those changes, even if there's, no design merit to it. It goes against the entire, concept of what we're trying to do. We do have to document that we are considering the proposed changes that they're providing. Also, we have our 30-day time frame from when the offer is made. And when Megan was talking about the appraisals, one of the things she mentioned was the existence of a waiver evaluation, which can be done by someone who's, just a right-of-way employee, not necessarily a licensed appraiser. In order to condemn, the offer has to be made by a certified, Missouri certified real estate appraiser. And so if the offer was based on a waiver evaluation, the property will have to be reappraised. More than likely, the offer will be different, and that 30 days is going to have to start over at that point. So that can create some delays in there too. And then, as Brenda was talking, generally, in a pre-COVID world, we would say that we would like, 6 months if condemnation is necessary. What we're seeing now is that 8 to 9 is more likely. that is just the more realistic expectation of where we are. We've been filing a lot of petitions here in St. Louis for an ADA job, and it's just one delay after another to get the condemnation hearing. And that's the easy part. Once you get past that, then you still have to do your viewing, and then you have to figure out how much the property is worth and make all those arguments. And so it is just a much more difficult process to do remotely, which is what most of the courts are requiring at this point. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is a flowchart, which is very involved, and it is in the EPG. I will let you look at that when you have time, rather than trying to go through it. A lot of it covers stuff that we've already talked about, but just one, basically the gist is here, there are a lot of steps in the process, and for every step there is the potential for something to go wrong. Next slide, please. As far as the actual internal process of how the condemnation happens, it starts by district right-of-way staff getting all of the information they have to the regional counsel's office in order to put the petition together. And from your perspective, one of the important things to consider is some of the stuff that we get is all the communication that has happened between both the negotiator and the engineers, as well as between the negotiator and the property owner. So sometimes, you know, if promises are made to the property owners, if concessions are made, a lot of times we're going to be stuck with those. And so we need that communication in order to be aware of everything that's happened thus far. We already talked about the certification of the plans, and the big hang up there is the potential for design plan, if there's plan changes that have to go back. As we talked about, those will also have to go on the commission meeting minutes, and you know that can put another 2-month wrench into it potentially. And then by law, the commissioners are required to return their report of commissioners, which tells us how much the property is worth, what we have to pay, in 45 days. But practically speaking, there's no punishment for them if they don't, and neither we nor the property owner is going to go banging on their doors saying, hey, give us an answer now, when we want them to come down on our side. We're going to be as gentle as we can and not try and push them any more than we absolutely have to. And then the next slide, please. The other thing here is that as far as legal possession, physical possession is a whole different thing. But legal possession happens once we pay the money into the court, and unless and until we do, we cannot touch that property. We might think we have everything together, but until that check is made and paid at the courthouse, we do not have the right to get on them. Finally, one of the things that was talked about was, when we condemn for unknown ownership or confused title, on those cases, we have to do what's called publish to the unknowns, which basically puts another month into the process that we would not normally have to account for. And finally, if relocation's there, it can go out a whole nother 100 days roughly. But I just wanted to run through some of the places where the condemnation process can create snags, just so that you're aware and don't get surprised. And that's especially bad this particular year. So with that, I'll hand it off to Mindy and Greg to talk about clearance. Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Jason. As you can see here with the clearance certification, PS&E, you hear about that deadline. It is due 10 weeks prior to the letting. PODI projects are due 14 weeks prior to the letting, and that is due to the federal highway oversight on those PODI projects. They require that extra time frame for that. Entire clearance is due to federal highway 7 weeks prior to the letting. When we talk about project's entire clearance, it means when we have cleared all the property rights on all the parcels for that project. We have legal and physical possession of all the parcels. Legal possession means the deed has been recorded. Physical possession is the relocation was required, and all the acquisition and relocation process has been completed. The property owner has been paid in full for all the rights we've acquired.
And it's important to notice that if the project does not have all parcels cleared by that 7-week window, we do have an option to do a conditional clearance statement that is required for us to go to financial services with, and potentially even federal highway. Situations that may require a conditional clearance are generally due to pending payrolls, relocation, or condemnation, as we've discussed. Please talk with your right-of-way managers about the use of conditional clearances on a case-by-case basis. Please also understand that the use of conditional clearances may cause bids to be higher if we are asking contractors to stay off critical parcels until we have them in our possession. Generally speaking, if the project is not entirely cleared 7 days before the letting date under that conditional statement, the project will be reevaluated, and depending on the risk that the commission is willing to accept, the project may be pulled from that particular letting and moved to a different letting date. Projects that are let approximately 5 weeks after advertisement, see the right-of-way clearance schedule we have created to know what deadline dates are required for specific advertisement dates. With that, I'll throw it over to Holly.
Good afternoon. My name's Holly Thronson. I'm the right-of-way manager in the Northeast District. And today I just wanted to briefly explain that you may have instances where you have a STIP project that is in conjunction with an LPA project or a project with a local public agency that requires right-of-way. And local public agencies must follow the same uniform act when acquiring property or property rights. So all these steps that have been explained this afternoon, the request for an acquisition authority with environmental approval, the valuations, the letter offers, the clearance certification, all those things have to be followed and completed and done by the local public agency as well if it's a project in conjunction with a STIP project. Timelines may be affected by these processes, and sometimes the local public agencies, because they may not have projects that have right-of-way, might not be aware of the effects of these processes on their projects. So some things that might add time to the project is if they do have a project that has to have condemnation or relocation, as discussed earlier, that those do add time into there. MoDOT has the responsibility to ensure that all rights-of-way needed in connection with federal aid project is acquired in accordance with the Uniform Act. And MoDOT will monitor the LPA acquisition, staff, and fee services in the acquisition of these rights-of-way. If an LPA is not adequately staffed to perform these services, the use of fee services in the acquisition process is permitted. So from MoDOT's standpoint, it is our responsibility to guide the LPAs through this process and make sure that they're aware that they have to follow the Uniform Act as well, because there is federal money in their project. There's a flow chart in the LPA section of the EPG to help the local public agencies visualize and plan the acquisition process. So like I said, we're to provide oversight that the Uniform Act is followed. Agencies are therefore requested to consult with the right-of-way manager at the district office at any stage during the right-of-way process so that they can get guidance, that we can be a technical support and ensure that the right-of-way acquisition is in compliance with regulations. It's best early consultation can eliminate problems and facilitate delivery of federal funds. So the last thing you want to have to tell the local public agency after they think they have everything in order to let their project is that they didn't get the right documents signed or did not follow a process. And we definitely don't want to see them have any of their federal funds pulled. So it is MoDOT's responsibility to just provide oversight, be technical support, and be there for consultation to make sure that they understand the processes that need to be followed. Thank you for your time. And now I'll turn it over to Brandy Baldwin, who's going to talk about design build.
Thanks, Holly. Yeah, my name is Brandy Baldwin. I'm the project director for the I-70 Roadport Bridge Replacement Project and the I-70 Mineola Hill Climbing Lanes Project. I was previously the deputy project director on the Jam Clark Bridge Replacement Project, so I have a fair amount of design build experience, and I'd like to share some of that with you today. So budgeting right-of-way for a design build project is very similar to a build project. Many times there are already existing estimates, and those will typically remain the same. The only difference is when it is appropriate to put the risk or the decision of how much right-of-way is necessary for a project on a design build team. When this happens, those funds will be put in directly into the contract. The project team that's responsible for the project will work with the right-of-way department on determining how much right-of-way will be acquired prior to award. Typically, the good rule of thumb is enough right-of-way is purchased prior to award to clear a workable path forward for the design-build teams. EPG sections 236.3.4.3.1 and 236.3.7.8 provide you additional guidance on acquisition, authority, funding, and right-of-way clearance for design-build projects. Next slide, please. So the right-of-way plans for a design-build project should remain fairly simple and only include information property owners will need to make educated decisions with regards to their property. The goal is not to commit to things that are subject to change by the design builder. So typically we won't include typical sections, cross-sections, or other specific design details. The plans will include, however, a general alignment and slope limits to indicate the property owners where the required boundaries may be. So during the preliminary procurement phases of a design build project, both of those phases are very confidential. The procurement phase is a highly confidential phase, and the reason for that is to maintain the trust of the design builders pursuing the project. That information that they're sharing with us during that time is not being shared with anyone else. The preliminary phase is also confidential to maintain a level playing field amongst the proposing design builders. We don't want anyone to get information before it's available to everyone. And obviously this makes it difficult to maintain that confidentiality while talking with the public about right-of-way acquisition. We cannot ask property owners to sign confidentiality agreements, but we can ask them to keep any information that we share with them to themselves. But we also know that's very difficult for some people to do. So the best practice, we'll share the right-of-way plans with the proposing design builders at the same time that we begin acquiring right-of-way and sharing this information with the public. That'll maintain a level playing field. When the project team is drafting the RFP for the project, they will reach out to the right-of-way staff on drafting the specifics for the right-of-way section of the RFP. Typically, we include a reasonable timetable of properties that are being acquired prior to award. The purpose of this is to show the proposing design builders what properties we have already acquired, what properties we intend to acquire, and their anticipated acquisition dates, so they can make a plan for construction. A goal would be to acquire all property prior to the RFP release, but this is not always possible. The RFP also provides clear instructions to the proposers on what the role of our staff is during acquisition after award. And there is boilerplate language available to help us get that started. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg for design build projects. For additional training on design build and other alternative project delivery at MoDOT, I would encourage you to take the risk-based project delivery selection training. Dave Simmons and Stacy Smith are currently providing this training virtually, and if you're interested, you may contact them and jump in now. please contact myself or Dave Simmons, the statewide design build coordinator, if you have any questions.
First off, I just want to thank all the presenters today. Great presentation. The right-of-way staff have included their contact information for reference on this screen. But at this time, we're going to go ahead and take some questions. We're going to walk through question and answer pod. Some of the presenters have actually answered the question in the pod there, but we want to make sure that we capture these questions through the video. So I'll go ahead and start with a question on how complete should right-of-way plans be before submitting the right-of-way RES?
Yeah, and this is Melissa Shepperly in the environmental section, and my answer was that NEPA can be cleared during the preliminary RES, and then an 8-8. I'm sorry, do I have the wrong question? Complete enough that you don't expect major changes to them that would require it to resubmit another right-of-way RES. So they don't have to be signed right-of-way plans, but they do have to be complete enough that you don't expect major changes that would then require another submittal of a right-of-way RES.
All right, thanks, Melissa. Next question is, typically how close is the estimate to the final right-of-way cost?
Let's see if I'm still muffled. It depends on whether the right-of-way staff have enough information on the project to conduct a detailed estimate.
Okay, the next question is, will A dates be granted during the preliminary RES stage?
This is the one where I said NEPA can be cleared during the preliminary RES stage, and then an A date can be requested, but it won't be sent to the right-of-way manager like a right-of-way RES does. And NEPA can't be given without SHPO. So once SHPO is given, NEPA can be given.
All right, next question is, can fair market value review or analysis include those land values that are done privately and not gone through realtor sales?
This is Megan. Yes, the answer is yes, it can. We can use those. The only problem is it's hard to find out the details. A lot of the owners aren't willing to give us the information. And we also need to have specific details for that sale to consider it. So it's hard to find all those, but yes, we can use it.
Thanks, Megan. Next question, do right-of-way plans have to be recertified for any parcel changes or just changes to the parcels being condemned?
The right-of-way plans do have to be recertified, and this is to prevent these plans or this condemnation petition from getting kicked out when it goes to court, because that is one thing that if the opposing attorneys look at these plans and something has changed, they can present that to the judge and discredit MoDOT's credibility by having plans certified and filed that are not actually what we're building.
And Brenda, I'll add to that basically what the statute requires is that once the plans are certified by the commission, that they cannot be changed without further commission action. And that further commission action we have determined is actually getting, basically recertified from the commission as a whole, rather than just having the secretary sign off on it.
All right, so that's all the questions from the chat pod. So now we'll open up the floor for verbal questions. Please use the raise your hand tool in Webex if you have any questions. And Jessica, we'll go ahead and unmute you so you can ask your question. Jessica, are you seeing any hands raised?
Nope, there's no hands raised.
All right. All right. Well, I thank everybody for being here today. Like I said, the contact information for central office is on the last slide here that we have. If we didn't get to your questions on this topic today, please reach out to them. I hope today's presentation provided a better understanding of what you need to consider for right-of-way to ensure successful delivery of your projects. Thank you for participating in this webinar today. We appreciate any feedback on how we can improve this format or the content of future webinars. As we wrap up this webinar, we will be registering your participation in MoDOT-U. The Webex system allows us to track who is attending by computer, but we do not know who may be attending as part of the group or by call-in. If you are in attendance but not signed into Webex, please contact Jessica Gobin by email or phone at 573-751-2876 so that we can give you credit for today's training. I want to remind everyone that our next webinar is on NEPA and project development. It is scheduled for November 19th from 12:30 to 2:30. Please register in MoDOT-U for this webinar if you are interested in attending. This concludes our webinar for today. Thank you again for your participation, and I hope you learned a lot more about right-of-way today. Thanks.